From the moment the matte black Bentley rolled up to the gates of the Stoneridge country estate, trouble was already waiting. The guards stood stiff, the hedges were trimmed to military perfection, and the air carried the faint scent of money and inherited entitlement. It was the kind of place where people didn't ask who you were. They judged you the moment you stepped out of the car. And today, those judgments would ignite the first spark of a fire that would consume the Caldwell family's polished facade. Preston Caldwell stepped out of the driver's seat first, adjusting his tailored Navy suit. Billionaire, tech visionary, and heir to one of the most established families on the East Coast. Yet his shoulders looked heavy, as if carrying the weight of a lifetime of expectations. When the passenger door opened, a man in a simple cotton suit stepped out slowly. Tyrone Hale, 52, calm-eyed, deliberate, carrying himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived more storms than these polished white pillars ever had to face. His shoes were worn, his cuffs slightly frayed, and to every spectator watching from the grand steps, he looked like a man who didn't belong. That, Preston knew, was exactly why his family needed to meet him. The first voice they heard was sharp enough to cut glass. "Preston," Harrison Caldwell barked as he descended the steps like an emperor surveying his domain. His silver hair glinted in the sunlight, and his expression tightened the moment his eyes landed on Tyrone. He didn't greet him. He didn't ask his name. His face simply hardened with that old, familiar arrogance. "Who is this?" he demanded, though he'd already made up his mind. Before Preston could answer, Tyrone took a small step forward, hand extended, voice polite. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm a guest of Preston Caldwell." Harrison didn't shake his hand. He let the moment hang in the air, then laughed, short, cold, dismissive. "A guest?" Preston brings someone who appears to have wandered away from a service entrance and calls him a guest. Around them, several early arrivals paused, glancing over their shoulders. Phones lifted subtly, screens flickering. The spectacle had begun. Harrison took one more step until he stood close enough for his voice to drop into poison. "The staff entrance is behind the building. You may wait there with the drivers. That is where your kind is expected." His wife, Eleanor, let out a breathy, cruel giggle. She didn't cover it well. She didn't try. Tyrone lowered his still extended hand with quiet grace. He said nothing cruel, nothing defensive. "I'm here with Preston," he simply repeated. Preston's jaw clenched, but Tyrone gently touched his arm, a silent signal. Let it unfold. They walked through the entrance nevertheless, though each step felt like wading through a swamp of stairs. Inside, the reception hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers and white lilies arranged in perfect artifice. The wealthy guests drifted between champagne tables, whispering, side-eyeing, judging. And Tyrone felt each glance land like a verdict. A blonde woman with diamond earrings approached him with the smoothness of a practiced social predator. "And what exactly do you do?" she asked, already certain of the answer. When he replied that he was in finance, she blinked in disbelief before laughing lightly. "Finance? Oh, darling, we all dream." She drifted away before he could say another word. Another guest assumed he was part of the band. A third asked which car he had driven for the wedding party. A fourth suggested he speak to catering to find a more appropriate place to stand. Yet Tyrone remained unshaken. He didn't defend his status. He didn't announce his wealth. He didn't correct anyone's assumptions. He had learned long ago that people will reveal themselves long before he ever needs to reveal anything about who he truly is. The humiliation reached its peak when the general manager approached him for the second time that hour, insisting on reconfirming his invitation while wealthy guests breezed past unchecked. Tyrone handed over his card, waited patiently, and said only, "Thank you," when the man finally retreated. But while the room judged him, another man saw him. Derek Anderson, the groom, entered the hall in his crisp white tuxedo. He scanned the crowd, expression puzzled. Then his eyes landed on Tyrone, and everything inside him lit with recognition. He crossed the room quickly, ignoring the startled whispers around him. Without hesitation, without shame, without calculation, he grasped Tyrone's hand in both of his and greeted him with the words that would freeze the entire Caldwell family in place. "Hello, boss." The room fell silent instantly. 100 lifted eyebrows. 100 confused, uncomfortable stares. Dozens of phones raised just a fraction higher. Their entire perception of the man they had dismissed, judged, and mocked cracked. open like shattered porcelain. But this was only the beginning. Preston watched his father's face drain of color. Tyrone simply stood still, calm as ever, letting the truth settle over the room like a revelation none of them could escape. For a long, breathless second after Derek said, "Hello, boss," the entire ballroom seemed to forget how to move. Tyrone felt dozens of eyes on his face, on his unassuming suit, on the hand Derek still clasped in open respect. Somewhere behind the clink of a dropped fork and a muffled gasp, Preston saw his father sway as if the floor had tilted under him. But to really understand why those two words carried so much power, we have to step backward, long before the music, the flowers, and the judgmental stares. 3 hours earlier, the Bentley had glided through the iron gates, past stone lions and manicured lawns that seemed more like a performance than a landscape. Preston drove, fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel. Billionaire, founder of a cloud software empire, his name on magazine covers, his face on tech panels, yet he looked oddly tense, like a kid about to introduce a real friend to a family who preferred masks. Tyrone sat beside him in that plain gray cotton suit, jacket unbuttoned, watching the trees blur past. He could have come in a custom tux that cost more than most cars in the parking lot. He could have arrived in his own chauffeured Rolls. Instead, he'd chosen this: simple clothes, scuffed shoes, nothing that announced wealth before he opened his mouth. He had always preferred to give people the chance to show who they were before money distorted their behavior. "You still have time to change your mind," Tyrone said quietly as they approached the long driveway. "I can drop you off at the entrance and disappear into a quiet hotel lobby instead." Preston exhaled a humorless laugh. "If I back out now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Sam deserves more than a family that smiles in her face and sneers behind her back. And my father," he trailed off, jaw tightening. "My father needs a mirror he can't ignore." "That mirror is going to look a lot like me today," Tyrone replied, not accusing, just stating the obvious. Preston's grip tightened on the wheel. "You're my closest friend. You've been there since before any of this," he said, nodding toward his own designer watch, the car, the estate beyond. "I want you here because you've earned your place in my life. The question is whether my family has earned the right to meet you." An old memory threaded its way between them, unspoken but vivid. Yale, first semester. Preston was the rich boy everyone thought they understood. Legacy admit, old money, last name heavy with history. People approached him with rehearsed politeness or avoided him entirely, assuming they knew his values before he ever opened his mouth. Tyrone was the kid who came from a neighborhood that never made brochures, raised by a single mother who cleaned other people's homes to pay for his textbooks. He had arrived with one suitcase, a grant package, and a stack of expectations that he'd either fail or become someone else to fit in. They met in a library, of all places. Preston had been slumped over an economics text, pretending to read while listening to the whispers about the Caldwell boy, just loud enough to hear. Tyrone slid into the seat across from him without asking permission, dropped his own book on the table, and simply said, "You understand this graph?" "Because I don't." No comment about the last name. No flattery. No assumption. Just a straightforward question, one uncertain kid to another. Preston blinked in surprise, then grinned. "Honestly, I'm about 10 seconds from dropping this course." They'd spent the next hour puzzling through supply and demand curves and laughing at their own confusion. That hour turned into a friendship that outlasted dorm rooms, degrees, and early failures. Years later, when Preston's startup took off and Tyrone launched his own investment firm, they stayed in touch not because of usefulness, but because, at 18, they'd learned who each other was without the noise of titles and wealth. Back in the present, as the Bentley rolled to a stop near the stone steps of the estate, Tyrone smoothed his sleeves thoughtfully. "Your family still doesn't know what I do they?" he asked. Preston shook his head. "My mother knows your name. That's about it. My father knows there's a Tyrone somewhere in my past, but he's never asked who you are." He hesitated. "Part of me wanted to see what they'd do if they met you with no context. Just you and them. No resume. No net worth. So this is an experiment," Tyrone said, but there was no bitterness in it. "You want to see whether they've changed or if they're exactly who you remember." "I want my sister to know the truth," Preston replied. "About us. About them. About the lines they draw. Without even realizing they're drawing them." Tyrone's voice softened. And if the truth hurts? Preston swallowed. Then it's pain we were overdue for. When they stepped out of the car and into the bright afternoon, Tyrone already felt the weight of the place pressing down on him. Staff glanced his way, eyes flicking from his skin to his suit with the same quick assessment he had seen all his life. None of this was new. What was new was that this time, the man walking beside him was a billionaire from the world that usually held the power to judge. Preston, pale, privileged, anxious, and determined. 2 weeks before the wedding, that determination had started with a late-night phone call. Tyrone had been in his office, city lights glittering outside the window, spreadsheets open on his desk, and a framed photograph of his late mother watching him like a quiet guardian. His phone buzzed with Preston's name. "Tell me you're not calling to drag me into another startup pitch," Tyrone said, half teasing. "I'm calling because my little sister's getting married," Preston had replied. "And I need you there." There was a pause. Tyrone knew enough of Preston's family history to understand what that meant. "Your father's still the same?" "He's worse," Preston murmured. "He thinks this wedding is a brand exercise. He wants the right people, the right image. The groom is great, but he's not old money. Not the kind my father respects. And you?" He hesitated. "And I," Tyrone finished for him, "am the wrong color in the wrong suit in the wrong family portrait." "That's not what I said. You didn't have to. I grew up reading between those lines." Preston's voice came through rough. "I don't want to protect their comfort anymore. I want them to feel what they make everyone else feel. I want Sam to see who actually shows up for her. I want my father to realize the people he looks down on are standing 10 stories above him." Tyrone leaned back in his chair, considering. He didn't crave scenes. He didn't enjoy public drama. He had built his company quietly, letting returns speak louder than his name. But he also remembered a younger Preston, raw and hurting, trying to pull himself free from a worldview that had been forced on him since birth. "All right," Tyrone had said. "I'll come, but I won't play dress up to make them feel better. I won't arrive in a way that makes them automatically respect me. They'll see what they always see first. Then we'll see who they really are." Now, standing in that chandelier-lit ballroom, watching waiters glide through with silver trays and guests gliding with even more polished arrogance, Tyrone could feel the experiment unfolding exactly as predicted. He heard every dismissive word, every half-smile, every assumption that he must be staff, charity, or a mistake at the door. Through it all, he remained steady. Because their reactions weren't a surprise, they were confirmation. What Preston hadn't expected was how much it would hurt to watch. Every time another comment landed, he felt the sting as if they'd said it to him. Every time someone glanced at Tyrone like a stain on polished marble, his stomach twisted with shame he hadn't earned, but had inherited through his last name. When Derek finally spotted Tyrone and greeted him with, "Hello, boss," it wasn't just a casual line. It was years of loyalty and respect condensed into 2 words. 2 words that shattered the story everyone in that room had written in their heads. "Boss?" someone near the bar whispered, eyebrows knitting. "The groom works for him?" another murmured, glancing between Derek's tux and Tyrone's simple suit. Preston saw his father go pale, Eleanor's lips part in stunned confusion. A few guests had already pulled out their phones, not to film a spectacle now, but to search. Fingers flew over screens, feeding the algorithm a name Derek spoke just seconds later, voice steady, proud, unapologetic. "This is my employer," he told the room. "My mentor. The man who gave me a chance when no one else would. This is Tyrone Hale." Miniature explosions went off in silent feeds as profiles appeared, headlines loaded, numbers displayed. Investment firm. Billions under management. Self-made. The contradictions battered against the image of the poor man they'd just finished tearing down. Faces flushed. Eyes dropped. Some fumbled for excuses even as the truth stared back at them. But this wasn't the end of the lesson. The night was just beginning to reveal who everyone truly was. The ballroom regained its movement slowly, like a machine sputtering back to life after a sudden shutdown. People shifted in their seats, straightened their jackets, or pretended to sip champagne they no longer tasted. Whispers flickered from table to table, but no one spoke loudly enough to claim their own words. Tyrone stood still in the middle of it all, not triumphant, not gloating, only composed, observing the shock ripple across a room that had judged him before he ever said a single sentence. Harrison Caldwell remained frozen near the staircase, one hand gripping the railing as if someone had removed the ground beneath him. He stared at Tyrone the way a man stares at a puzzle piece he cannot comprehend. A man he had mocked, dismissed, and ordered to the back entrance was now revealed to be someone whose name commanded respect in every boardroom from New York to Singapore. And worse, someone connected to his future son-in-law. Eleanor tried to whisper something to her husband, but her voice shook too much. Her lips trembled as she clutched her pearls like a lifeline. In her world, image was everything, and this moment had cracked her image like a plate dropped from a great height. The realization that dozens of guests had watched them belittle a billionaire was a humiliation she could barely process. Meanwhile, Derek kept his hand on Tyrone's shoulder, not backing away despite the heavy silence surrounding them. His eyes were bright, almost defiant, as if daring anyone to question what he'd just said. For the first time since he'd entered this family's orbit, he stood with his truth fully visible. And it had arrived at the perfect moment. Preston approached slowly, tension still sharp in his jaw. He stopped beside Tyrone and met his friend's eyes with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "I didn't expect this reaction," he murmured under his breath. "But I should have. I knew what they'd be like." Tyrone's voice remained soft, controlled. "Nothing happened here that surprised me. The only people surprised are the ones who never questioned their own behavior." Before Preston could respond, someone else stepped forward, the club's general manager, Richard Thornton. His clipboard shook slightly in his hand. 10 minutes ago, he'd questioned Tyrone for the second time, demanding extra verification despite the matching invitation and ID. Now, realizing whom he had spoken to with suspicion, his voice came out unsteady. "Mr. Hale," he managed, I'd like to personally apologize for any earlier misunderstanding." Tyrone simply nodded. "You did what you believed necessary. What matters now is that you understand why it happened." Thornton swallowed, guilt crawling over his features. But not everyone reacted with remorse. Near the far end of the room, Margaret Whitfield, the woman who had suggested calling security earlier, leaned toward her husband and hissed, "Well, how were we supposed to know? He didn't look wealthy." Her husband whispered back, "That's not the point, Margaret." "Oh, please. Appearance matters. It always has." Tyrone heard every word. And if he felt anything, it didn't show. His face stayed calm, almost serene, the same unshakable stillness he carried into every room where he was underestimated. Then, cutting through the tension like a blade, Samantha Caldwell appeared at the top of the staircase, still in her robe, her hair half pinned, makeup half done. She stared at the crowd, confused by the silence, then descended the steps quickly when she saw Derek. "Why is everyone so quiet?" Derek turned toward her, and the entire room subtly shifted its focus to the bride. "It's nothing," he began gently. "Just people learning something they should have known from the start." Samantha's gaze moved around the room, landing finally on Tyrone. She blinked, startled by the intensity of the moment she had unknowingly walked into. "Hello," she said, voice soft but sincere. "I'm Samantha." Tyrone bowed his head slightly. "Congratulations." Her eyes drifted from him to her father, noting the panic in Harrison's expression. It didn't take long for her to sense the truth. Something had happened, something ugly, something she had been sheltered from all her life. "What did you do?" she whispered to her father. Harrison stiffened. "Nothing. There was simply a misunderstanding." Derek's jaw tightened. "A misunderstanding? You humiliated him the moment he stepped out of the car." A few guests gasped. Others looked down, avoiding involvement. Samantha's voice wavered. "Dad, what did you say?" Eleanor stepped forward quickly. "Darling, this isn't the time." "It is," Samantha said sharply. "Because if someone was mistreated at my wedding, I want to know why." Her father's eyes darted between the crowd, his wife, and the groom. He straightened his posture, but his face couldn't hide the mask cracking beneath it. "I simply asked a stranger to use the appropriate entrance." "You assumed he was staff," Preston cut in. "No. Worse. You assumed he wasn't worth your respect." The weight of that sentence pressed down on the entire ballroom. Samantha's voice softened to a tremble. "Dad, how could you treat someone like that?" Her gaze flickered again to Tyrone, especially someone Preston brought as a friend. Harrison opened his mouth, but no defense came out. His thoughts scrambled for excuses. His pride wrestled with exposure, and his silence became its own confession. Instead, the ballroom lights flickered slightly as a staff member adjusted equipment on the terrace. Guests exhaled nervously, but the tension held like a stretched wire. Preston looked at Tyrone again. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you." "There's nothing to apologize for," Tyrone replied calmly. "People show you who they are. Your father did. So did everyone else who watched it happen." That truth echoed like a bell. Derek stepped closer to Tyrone. "You didn't deserve any of it. And I won't let anyone pretend it didn't happen." At that moment, someone near the entrance began typing furiously. The whispers grew louder. A few guests stared at their phones with expressions that shifted from curiosity to shock. Someone had discovered who Tyrone truly was. One by one, screens lit with headlines. Tyrone Hale, CEO of Hale Ventures. One of the wealthiest self-made investors on the East Coast. Estimated net worth, $4 billion. The room stiffened with collective realization. And Tyrone felt the first shift in energy, not respect, but fear masquerading as admiration. He had felt it many times before, and it never impressed him. Suddenly, everything they had said earlier seemed to replay in the guests' minds like a damning soundtrack. He must be lost. He doesn't belong here. Maybe he's part of the waitstaff. Call security. Now, every one of those judgments burned with fresh shame. But before anyone could scramble to rewrite their behavior, Tyrone stepped back, lifting his chin slightly. "Let's continue with the wedding," he said calmly. "This day is not about me." That simple dignity left a deeper mark on them than any speech could have. Yet beneath the elegant lighting, beneath the string quartet, beneath the forced smiles settling back onto faces, something else was happening, quiet but inevitable. The entire foundation of the Caldwell family's respected reputation was beginning to crack. The ceremony went on as if nothing had happened, because that's what families like the Caldwells knew how to do best: perform. The garden terrace overlooking the rolling lawns and distant water had been transformed into a picture-perfect scene. White chairs fanned out in neat rows, flowers draped around an arch, a string ensemble playing something gentle that floated across the guests like perfume. But under the beautiful arrangement, the air felt charged, brittle, ready to break. Tyrone took his seat at the far back, exactly where his name had been placed on the chart, near the service doors and the emergency exit. It was a position that said, "You're allowed in, but not really part of us." He didn't complain. If anything, he welcomed the distance. From there, he could see the entire room of faces, could watch the subtle shifts of expression as they tried to package what had just happened into something that wouldn't disturb their perfect afternoon. Samantha appeared at the top of the aisle, radiant in a dress that caught the sunlight, eyes locked on Derek as if nothing existed except the man waiting for her. For a few moments, the tension faded. Tyrone watched her walk, watched Derek's face soften with gratitude and awe. Whatever else could be said about this family, the love between the bride and groom was real. That, at least, deserved to be honored. Preston stepped up to escort his sister down the aisle. Their father had refused. Still shaking from the humiliation, he was busy blaming on everyone but himself. Samantha slipped her arm through Preston's and they moved together, brother and sister, carrying years of shared childhood between them. As they passed the rows, Tyrone could see Samantha fighting to keep the smile from trembling on her lips. She knew something was wrong. She didn't yet know the full story. The vows were tender. Derek spoke of second chances and the day he met her when he felt like he had finally come home. Samantha spoke of loyalty and choosing not the most impressive life on paper, but the safest place for her heart. Guests dabbed at their eyes, some with genuine emotion, some because weddings had trained them to tear up on cue. When they kissed and the crowd rose in applause, Tyrone clapped too, sincerely. Love, he thought, should not have to fight this hard just to exist. When the ceremony ended, guests began drifting back toward the ballroom for the reception. The spell of romance thinned, replaced by mutters and stolen glances. Phones reappeared. Articles refreshed. Messages were quietly sent to friends who weren't there. "You will not believe what just happened at this wedding." Inside, the ballroom had been transformed again, tables glistening with crystal glassware, candles flickering between towering floral arrangements. The place cards guided everyone to their assigned roles in this grand tableau. The important families arranged near the center with perfect views of the dance floor. Business allies and donors along the outer ring. Staff sweeping through the edges like shadows. Tyrone found his name at a small, round table tucked into the corner, half hidden behind a column. A seat near the kitchen doors where servers would push through with trays and carts. A table for those who could be invited without being truly embraced. He simply smiled to himself. It was almost too symbolic. Before the first course, Harrison cornered Preston on the stone terrace, away from the crowds and the clinking silverware. The wind off the water carried the faint smell of salt and cut grass. Harrison's face was flushed, eyes narrowed, jaw set with the stubborn pride of a man who had spent his life unquestioned. "You've made a fool of me," he hissed, keeping his voice low enough not to draw attention, but intense enough to sting. "On your sister's wedding day, no less. Was that your plan? To embarrass your own father in front of everyone?" Preston didn't look away. He leaned against the railing, hands folded, gaze steady. "No, Dad. I just wanted you to meet my friend. You did the rest yourself. You brought him here, dressed like that, with no warning, no introduction, just waiting for people to make the wrong assumption." "The wrong assumption?" Preston repeated softly. "Or the honest one? The one that's been sitting under your skin for decades." Harrison's lips curled. He could have announced who he was. He could have prevented this. "He shouldn't have to declare his net worth to be treated like a person," Preston said. "That's exactly the problem. You respect money more than character, influence more than humanity, and now the whole room knows it." His father's eyes flashed. "You talk like this now because you've made your own fortune and think you're above the family that gave you your start. Let me be very clear, Preston. You don't get to spit on the name that built these walls." Preston straightened slowly. "I'm not spitting on the name. I'm refusing to keep pretending it's clean." For a heartbeat, they stared each other down. Years of unspoken resentment pressed between them. Then Harrison played the card he'd been holding in reserve, the one he'd always relied on when control began slipping from his grasp. "The trust," he said coldly. "Samantha's trust fund. Your future inheritance. You think you're untouchable, but you're not. I can freeze distributions. I can delay transfers. I can make sure your little rebellion has consequences." A few feet away, a server opened the terrace door to carry out a tray, then paused, realizing he'd walked into something volatile. He backed away silently, letting the door fall closed. Preston's expression did not falter. "You'd punish your own daughter for a man you humiliated? You'd use money to control who she's allowed to love and who she's allowed to invite to her own wedding." "I'll protect this family from further disgrace," Harrison snapped. "Your choices have embarrassed us." "That man? You mean the one you ordered to wait with the drivers?" Preston cut in. "The one signing checks your old firm would kill to see. The one who's done more for other people's children than you ever did for your own." Color flooded Harrison's face. "I won't argue with you about this. I've made my decision. Samantha's access to the trust is suspended until she starts making choices worthy of her name." For a long moment, Preston was silent. Then, slowly, a small, sad smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I knew you'd go there eventually," he said. "That's why I made sure you can't." "What?" "I had my own lawyers review the documents when I turned 30, Preston explained. "Sam's trust is separate. You're a trustee in name, but you can't unilaterally block her access. The distributions are automatic once she's married. Today, if you try to interfere, she can take you to court, and she'll win. Your threats don't work anymore, Dad. You built a cage for us and forgot to notice when the lock rusted off." The words hit harder than any slap. Harrison took a step back, momentarily unsteady. The power he'd always held like a badge seemed to slip from his fingers. For the first time, he looked smaller. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, though it sounded less like a warning and more like an old man trying to rewrite a reality that refused to change for him. "No," Preston replied quietly. "I'm finally refusing to repeat yours." He walked away, leaving his father on the terrace, surrounded by an empire that suddenly felt far less secure. Inside, the music shifted to a lighter melody as dinner service began. Plates were set down with practiced grace. Laughter rose in uneven bursts as guests tried to regain a sense of normalcy. But at Tyrone's corner table, the mood was different, quieter, more thoughtful. He sat alone for a few minutes, watching the crowd, watching how quickly people's smiles returned once the threat of being directly involved passed. Some of them had watched his mistreatment with mild amusement, then watched his reveal with stunned horror, and now tried to pretend they'd been neutral all along. It was a dance he knew too well. As he lifted his glass of water, his gaze drifted to the window. The view of the perfectly manicured golf course blurred, replaced by a memory. He was 10 years old again, sitting on a folding chair in a cold garage while his mother scrubbed someone else's floors. The scent of motor oil, the sound of a washing machine in the corner, the ache in his fingers as he gripped his schoolbook tightly to keep from crying. The homeowner had insisted he wait outside or in the garage because children make a mess. But Tyrone had understood, even at 10, that wasn't the real reason. "You stay right here, baby," his mother had said, tucking a blanket around his legs. "You read your chapters. You do your homework. Don't you ever let their version of you become your truth." He had done exactly that. He'd sat there for hours, reading words that would build his future while listening to the sounds of a life he was never meant to step into. Years later, when the first major deal closed and he signed the papers that would change everything, he thought of that garage, of the quiet humiliation, of his mother's steady hands. Now, sitting at the back of the Caldwell wedding, he felt the same echo, but this time, the story was different. He wasn't the boy waiting in the cold. He was the man who'd stepped through the front doors of places never designed to welcome him, and the people inside were scrambling to adjust around him. From the main table, Derek glanced over and caught his eye, offering a small, grateful nod. Tyrone gave one back, just enough to say, "I'm still here. I'm not leaving because of them." Samantha, now back in her dress and seated beside her husband, kept stealing uncertain glances between her father's empty chair and Tyrone's corner table. She had grown up inside this world, had learned its rules without ever being asked if she agreed with them. Today was the first time the curtain had truly been pulled back. At the far end of the room, near the bar, a woman around 40 watched everything with sharp, observant eyes. Dark hair pulled back, posture composed but alert, she took in every interaction with the quiet scrutiny of someone used to reading between institutional lines. Her name was Michelle Carter, a civil rights attorney and Derek's longtime mentor, invited as a guest. Unlike most people in the room, she wasn't shocked by what had happened. She was cataloging it. When she finally made her way to Tyrone's table, she didn't lead with flattery or apology. She simply set her drink down and said, "I've seen this club from the outside for years. Tonight, I'm seeing everything I suspected in real time." He raised an eyebrow. "You know the place?" "I know its record," she replied. "No black members in a century. A complaint dismissed a few years back because one person's story wasn't enough evidence of discrimination. Funny how one incident never counts as a pattern, until people like your friend decided to stop pretending." Tyrone smiled faintly. Patterns have a way of revealing themselves whether institutions admit it or not. She studied him for a moment. "You handled them with a lot more grace than they deserved." "My mother didn't raise me to match someone else's worst behavior," he said simply. Michelle nodded. "If you ever want to do more than just let them squirm," she added quietly, "call me." She slid a business card onto the table, not pushing it, not insisting, just making the option real. He looked at the card but didn't pick it up yet. "Tonight isn't about burning their world down," he said. "It's about making sure the right people in this room remember what they saw when they go back to their own." She considered that. Sometimes that's the first step. They both turned their attention back to the center of the room, where the music softened and the clinking began to fade. The DJ tapped the microphone, announcing that speeches were about to start. Chairs squeaked. People settled. The lights dimmed slightly. And as Preston slowly rose from his seat, moving toward the front with a glass in his hand, a hush fell over the room again. This time, it wasn't curiosity. It was anticipation mixed with fear. Because everyone knew, if anyone was going to say what they were all trying to bury, it would be him. The clinking died away as Preston stepped into the pool of light near the head table, a single figure holding a champagne glass in one hand and the microphone in the other. The DJ faded the music, and the room sank into a dense, almost suffocating quiet. Everyone knew wedding speeches were supposed to be funny, sentimental, safe. But nothing about Preston's expression looked safe. His face was calm, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a decision already made. He exhaled slowly, then smiled at Samantha and Derek. "Tonight," he began, his voice steady, "is about my little sister and the man she chose. It's about love that had to push through more walls than most people here can imagine." A soft ripple of uneasy laughter stirred the air, then died when they realized he wasn't joking. Preston's gaze moved around the room, not in a sweeping performance, but in deliberate, quiet acknowledgement. But before I raise a glass to them, I need to tell you a story. Samantha's fingers tightened around Derek's hand. Tyrone watched from his corner table, shoulders relaxed, eyes attentive. He knew this was the moment Preston had been walking toward ever since he called 2 weeks ago. When I arrived at Yale as an 18-year-old, Preston said, I carried my last name like a neon sign. People saw Caldwell and decided they knew everything already. Some wanted favors. Some wanted distance. Very few wanted me. He paused, letting that sink in. One afternoon, I sat alone in the library pretending to study economics. I was really just trying to figure out who I was without my father's shadow. A faint murmur passed through the crowd at the word shadow, but no one dared interrupt. A guy sat down across from me. Preston continued. No introduction. No pretense. He pushed his textbook toward me and said, You understand this? Because I definitely don't. Laughter flickered, genuine this time, as people imagined it. Preston smiled at the memory. That was the first time in my life someone treated me like just another confused freshman instead of a symbol. That guy was Tyrone Hale. Every head turned, almost in unison, toward the back of the room. Tyrone remained seated, his expression modest, almost embarrassed by the attention. For 25 years, Tyrone has been my friend, Preston said. Long before I started a tech company. Long before anyone called him boss in a skyscraper office. We've seen each other broke, scared, uncertain. We've seen each other succeed. But the most important thing we've seen, his voice sharpened now, is how the world decides who's worthy before it even asks their name. Silence stretched. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, their earlier comments echoing in their own minds. Some of you today, Preston went on quietly, looked at Tyrone and saw what you expected, the wrong skin tone, the wrong suit, the wrong cues. You saw less than what was there. You assumed staff, charity, burden. You saw what you've been conditioned to see. His eyes swept over them, soft but unflinching. That doesn't say anything about who Tyrone is. It says everything about who you are. At the main table, Samantha's eyes filled with tears. Derek's jaw tightened in pride. Near the back, Michelle watched with a kind of fierce satisfaction, as if she'd waited years to see someone with this last name say these words in this room. When my father told Tyrone to wait with the drivers, Preston said, and this time the words landed like a slap. He wasn't just insulting one man. He was revealing the architecture of how he sees people, how this family has seen people, how this club has seen people. And a lot of you went along with it because it felt normal. There was no escaping the weight of that accusation. Several guests looked down at their plates, cheeks reddening. Phones stayed face down, not out of respect, but because no one wanted to see their own hypocrisy reflected back through a search result. Tyrone sat still, his gaze steady. This was not his revenge. This was Preston's reckoning. But here's the thing, Preston continued. Tyrone didn't come here to impress you. He didn't wear his success like a badge. He didn't correct you when you assumed the worst. He didn't need your approval. He knows who he is when no one is watching. And that, Preston's voice softened, is why I trust him more than I trust most people who grew up in rooms like this. For a moment, the tension shifted into something else, reflection, maybe even respect. Not the hollow kind given to big numbers and expensive logos, but the kind that creeps in when a mirror is held up and you don't entirely like what you see. Sam, Preston said, turning to his sister, his tone warming. You chose a man who knows how to respect people before he knows their resume. Who chose his mentor not because of who he could help him impress, but because of the kind of man he wanted to become. I'm proud of you for that. I'm proud of the life I know you two will build. Samantha covered her mouth, shoulders shaking as tears spilled openly now. Derek squeezed her hand, his own eyes shining. Preston lifted his glass slightly. So, here's my wish for you both. May your home be a place where no one ever has to prove their worth to be treated with dignity. May you raise children who understand that character is measured by how we treat the people who can do nothing for us. And may you never, ever confuse wealth with worth. Noise didn't return in a rush. It came back slowly, in the form of soft applause that grew into something stronger, fuller, more sincere. Some people clapped because everyone else did, others clapped because they meant it. Derek stood, raising his own glass. I'd like to add something, he said, taking the microphone. The room quieted again. When I met Tyrone, I had a degree, a stack of rejection letters, and not much else. Every firm I went to told me I wasn't the right fit. Some said it with nice words. Some didn't bother. His eyes flicked briefly toward Harrison's empty seat, then back to the crowd. Tyrone looked at me and saw someone who'd work hard if he was given a real shot. That's all. No pedigree, no family name, no club membership required. Just potential. He turned toward Tyrone and lifted his glass. You didn't just become my boss. You became the example I measure myself against. If I can be half the leader to other people that you were to me, I'll have done something worth being proud of. This time, when the applause rose, it felt different. Less forced. Less desperate to cover awkwardness. There was a rawness in it. The feeling of something long buried finally being dragged into the light. Tyrone inclined his head, acknowledging the tribute with the same quiet dignity he'd shown all day. He didn't stand. He didn't bow. He simply let the gratitude wash over him without letting it swell his ego. He had lived too many lives in the shadow of others' expectations to be moved by a single room's reversal. Across the hall, Eleanor slipped out quietly, one hand pressed to her chest as if trying to hold herself together. On the terrace, Harrison watched through the glass, having returned just in time to hear enough of Preston's speech to understand that the narrative had slipped out of his control. His grip on the railing tightened until his knuckles turned white. For the first time in a long time, no one rushed out to ask his opinion. No one stepped forward to reassure him that he was right. The room had turned away, not theatrically, but quietly, decisively. Later, when the music resumed and couples began drifting to the dance floor, the illusion of normalcy returned in fragments. But under the laughter and the clinking glasses, conversations shifted. Some guests approached Tyrone with stammered apologies, framing their words as misunderstandings, innocent mistakes, or unfortunate timing. He accepted the apologies politely, but he didn't sugarcoat the truth. You reacted based on what you saw, he told one man who insisted he meant no harm. Tyrone's tone remained calm, but his eyes were sharp. Maybe next time, ask yourself why you saw what you did before you knew anything about who I am. Others didn't approach him at all, suddenly fascinated by centerpieces and dessert menus. At the main table, Samantha finally slipped away from the circle of relatives and well-wishers and made her way carefully through the crowd toward the back corner. Her dress brushed against chair legs. Her veil caught briefly on someone's cufflink, but she didn't stop. When she reached Tyrone's table, she didn't sit. She stood there in her wedding gown, looking at him as if seeing something completely new. I wanted to say thank you, she said quietly. For coming, for staying, for letting today show me what I needed to see. You might not think you needed it, Tyrone replied gently. But you did. Everyone in this room did. She swallowed hard. I grew up thinking our world was normal, untouchable, that the way my father talked was just how things were. But today I saw how much harm it does when no one challenges him, when we all just let it pass. Her voice quivered. I'm sorry for what he said to you, for what people did when they thought you were small. His gaze softened. You're not responsible for your father's choices, only your own. And you made a good one when you chose Derek. That's what you should remember tonight. Samantha nodded, eyes bright. Derek says he owes you everything. He owes me nothing, Tyrone answered. He took the chance he was given and did the work. That's all. She hesitated, then glanced toward the terrace where her father stood alone. Do you think he'll ever change? She asked. Tyrone followed her glance. The figure framed by the glass looked older than he had that morning, like a statue someone had forgotten to maintain. People don't change because they're exposed, he said after a moment. They change if they decide to. Being confronted is just the invitation. And if he never takes it, then you build something different, Tyrone said. For yourself. For your future children. You break the pattern he was too afraid to face. She let those words settle in her chest like seeds. From somewhere near the DJ booth, the announcer's voice rang out again, calling everyone's attention for one final surprise before dessert. Preston and Derek exchanged a glance, then looked toward Tyrone with a small, conspiratorial smile. Because there was one more truth to reveal. One that tied the Caldwell name and Tyrone's generosity together in a way Harrison would never have imagined. The DJ's voice floated over the chatter like a gentle bell. Ladies and gentlemen, before dessert is served, we have one final announcement from the family. The lights softened. A spotlight drifted slowly toward Preston and Derek as they stepped onto the small stage near the band. The hum of conversation thinned into a hush, polite curiosity spreading through the room like ripples. But for those who had been paying attention all evening, it wasn't curiosity they felt, it was anticipation. Tyrone remained at his corner table, hands loosely folded, posture calm but alert. He had no idea what was coming next, though Preston had thrown him a knowing look that hinted something significant lingered beneath the surface. Samantha watched from the head table, her fingers intertwined with Derek's, her expression wide-eyed and tense. And on the terrace behind the glass doors, Harrison stood half-hidden by shadows, chest rising and falling too fast, as if bracing for one more blow to his carefully built empire. Preston tapped the microphone lightly. "Thank you," he began, eyes sweeping the room. "Tonight has been revealing in more ways than one. My sister married a man she loves. We heard vows that reminded us what truly matters in life. And some of us," he added softly, "learned truths we needed to face." A few guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one interrupted. Derek stepped forward, clearing his throat. "There's one more truth we want to share, one that connects this family and another in ways none of you expected." He glanced toward Tyrone with a gentle smile. "And it concerns a young woman many of you know." A murmur fluttered across the room. Samantha's brows pulled together. Preston continued, 3 years ago, a member of our extended family received a life-changing opportunity. A full educational grant to study abroad. A chance she never imagined possible. A scholarship that changed her path entirely." The room stilled, and in the back corner, Tyrone blinked, a quiet realization forming as Preston spoke. "Most of you know my cousin, Olivia," Preston said. "The one studying at Cambridge. Brilliant. Determined. Someone who deserved a future that wasn't limited by financial barriers." He paused. "What most of you don't know is how she got there." A few gasps slipped through the crowd, not from scandal, but from dawning comprehension. "The scholarship that sent Olivia across the ocean," Preston said with deliberate clarity, "was funded by the Wallace Foundation." His eyes locked on Tyrone. "By him." Silence spread like wildfire. Dozens of heads swiveled toward Tyrone in disbelief. Not because of the money, not because of the generosity, but because of the pure, staggering irony. A man they had dismissed, belittled, judged at the door, had anonymously empowered one of their own. Samantha's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Derek's voice came next. Olivia didn't know at the time. Neither did the Caldwells. Tyrone reviews applications without names, without backgrounds, without family associations. He approves them based on merit, character, and need. And Olivia earned every bit of her scholarship. A wave of murmured astonishment rolled through the ballroom. Tyrone sat frozen, not embarrassed, not proud, just quietly reflective. He had not come to this wedding to be exposed as a benefactor. He didn't do philanthropy for applause. But now, seeing the shock etched on these faces, he understood how deeply this revelation cut through their assumptions. Preston raised his glass slightly, voice steady. "The man some of you looked at today like he was less than you is the same man who opened the door to our cousin's future." It was a simple sentence, but it landed with the force of a lifetime's worth of unspoken lessons. On the terrace, Harrison staggered back a step, gripping the railing to steady himself. His sister's child, his own niece, had been lifted into opportunity by the hands of the man he told to wait with the drivers. His breath hitched. In his chest, a mix of disbelief and shame rising like a flood he had no dam strong enough to hold back. Inside, Samantha stood abruptly, unable to remain seated a moment longer. Her gown rustled as she moved through the tables and knelt beside Tyrone's chair. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she whispered. Tyrone offered a gentle, humble smile. "Because scholarships aren't about who gives. They're about who deserves." His eyes softened. "Your cousin earned her future. I just helped remove one barrier." Samantha swallowed, overwhelmed. "You didn't even know she was a Caldwell?" He shook his head. "And it wouldn't have mattered if I did." Her breath trembled. "You've done more for my family than my father ever has." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. From across the room, Derek approached and clasped Tyrone's shoulder. "You changed Olivia's life. You changed mine. And whether this family admits it or not, you changed theirs too." Guests began to rise, slowly, cautiously, until nearly the whole room was on its feet. Not out of guilt, not out of the polished etiquette they'd been raised with, but out of dawning respect. Respect not born from money, but from character, from truth, from integrity exposed under pressure. Tyrone didn't stand. He didn't bow. He merely nodded once in appreciation, the quietest gesture of acceptance. On the terrace, Harrison pressed his hand flat against the glass door, eyes locked on the man he had misjudged so catastrophically. He looked older now, fragile in a way he'd never allowed himself to appear. Eleanor stood behind him, uncertain whether to comfort her husband or let him face the weight of his choices alone. For the first time in his life, Harrison Caldwell understood what it meant to be seen clearly and to be found wanting. The night continued, but something fundamental had shifted. Apologies, real ones, reached Tyrone's table. Conversations took on tones of humility rather than performance. Walls that had stood for generations began to crack under the pressure of truth. Later, as the final song played and guests drifted toward cars and carriages, Samantha found Tyrone on the dance floor's edge. "You coming to the farewell toast?" she asked. "I'll pass," he said gently. "This night belongs to you too." "Then, will we see you again?" she asked quietly. He studied her face, open now, earnest, free from the blinders she had worn her whole life. "If you and Derek build the kind of life you promised in your vows," he said softly, "I'd be honored to be part of it." Her eyes glimmered. "We will." Derek joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "Thank you," he said. "Not just for today, for everything." Tyrone smiled. "You didn't need me to become who you are. You just needed someone to open one door. You did the rest." As Tyrone stepped out into the cool night air, Preston caught up with him. The sky above was wide and clear, stars scattered like grains of truth finally freed from the shadows. "Thank you," Preston murmured, "for showing my sister what matters, and for showing my father who he really is." Tyrone turned slightly. "He has to choose his next step. Not you. Not me." Preston nodded slowly. "I know." He exhaled. "But today, I finally stopped pretending the man he wants me to be is the man I have to become." Tyrone clasped his shoulder. "That's the real change." As they walked toward the car, Preston's phone buzzed. A message from Olivia Caldwell herself. "I know the truth now. I want to thank him in person. He changed my life. I'll never forget it." Preston showed Tyrone the screen. Tyrone just shook his head with a soft, warm smile. "Tell her to focus on her future. That's thanks enough." Preston nodded. "I will." They reached the Bentley. As Tyrone opened the door, he glanced back at the glittering estate, beautiful on the outside, but hollowed by truth inside. And he felt nothing but peace. "You know," Preston said, leaning against the roof of the car, "my mother once said you were the best man our family ever met. I never told you that." Tyrone's eyebrow rose. "Complicated woman, your mother." Preston chuckled. "Yeah, but she wasn't wrong." Tyrone looked out at the road ahead. "Let's just get home." The car door shut softly. The engine hummed to life. And the man they'd underestimated pulled away without fanfare, without spotlight, without need for validation, leaving behind a family forever changed. Because in the end, it wasn't the billionaire who proved anything. It was the man beneath the suit, beneath the judgments, beneath the assumptions. It was his character that won.